Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third annual Connectivity Summit on Rural Aging. My hero, Robert F. Kennedy, once said, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." In January of 2016, I distinctly remember calling Vicki Shepard and Mary Flipsy to my office and envisioning a movement that would right the wrong with the injustice that we were seeing with seniors aging in rural America. I challenged the team that we could no longer wait by the wayside and commissioned them to launch a national program by the end of the summer of 2016, and admittedly speaking, Vicki looked at me as if I had two heads. I am confident she thought that I was absolutely crazy. Will you join me in acknowledging Vicki Shepard and Helen and Jill and Janice and Mary for recognizing and living out the words of Robert F. Kennedy and exploring the why not? Where's Vicki? Stand. Would they stand, please? Since that first summer of 2016, when we launched this summit, we built a strong coalition of stakeholders working to understand the challenges and the opportunities available to people who are aging in rural America. We have grown significantly. Look at the group that is here today. 3 years ago, we had no more than 75, 80 people. Last year, we had 150, and today we have close to 250. Thank you for the cause that you are moving forward. So has the national awareness of the issues that bring us together. It has increased as well. We have helped to elevate the social determinants of health. We have helped to include the awareness of the new chronic condition of the 21st century called loneliness. And it's not just hitting our seniors. Your decision to lend precious time and talent to our endeavor can and will reverse the growing national crisis. And our progress to date would not have been possible without our dedicated partners, and I'd like to recognize them at this time. The MIT Age Lab, including founder and director, Dr. Joseph Coughlin. Joe, where are you? The Jefferson College of Population Health, including the founder and dean emeritus, Dr. David Nash. Is David here yet? Has David arrived? Alexis, let's honor Alexis. And Healthy Villages, an organization that I co-founded with Kerry Kennedy, and our sponsors and grant makers in aging, Bass, Berry and Sims, Solera Health, Lyft, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. I am so grateful to all of you for joining us in this endeavor. Once upon a time, we called it the golden years. I think that that was very likely a myth from the get-go, though we can only hope. But today, the process of growing old can be challenging, and one that is compounded by this new century factors of demographics and technology and human mobility. I feel a personal sense of urgency on these issues, which I intend to explain later. Before we dive into the hard work of evaluating those new century challenges, I want to hit a pause and ask all of us to stand and offer each other a warm hug of gratitude. I am convinced that a warm embrace is really the souls coming together, and souls united in good cause and sound purpose can defeat all manner of social ailment. Thank you all for doing that. Did you know that physical contact is one of the best ways to lessen feelings of loneliness and isolation? We're going to learn a lot more about these issues and many other social determinants of health in the next 2 days. Most of us have the resolve to take that knowledge out in the world and use it to do good. Consider that in 1789, William Wilberforce used his mighty skills of oratory to lay before the British Parliament the abuses of the slave trade, the greatest evil of our times. His audience was skeptical, his youth a detriment, and at that time, his beliefs in the minority. But he persisted, and time again, he presented irrefutable evidence of the atrocities associated with slave trade. Wilberforce was a voice for slaves who could not speak for themselves. In the face of fierce opposition, he stayed the course, even as members of Parliament quite literally turned their backs on him. In his last plea before Parliament, and as he spoke, people walked out of the chamber and he said, "I am putting the evils squarely on your shoulders." And he did that with these words, quote, "Having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never, ever again say that you did not know." And that is what this conference and summit is about. You will learn a lot in the next 2 days. And let's not leave on Friday abdicating the responsibility we all now have to make better the place for the seniors who are aging in America. He revealed the stories of others. Amidst such great negative reaction, he was not afraid to do the right thing. He was transformative, knowing that transformative leaders not only do things right, they do the right thing. And in the next 2 days, will you join me in this cause to do the right thing for our seniors, for our young who are experiencing loneliness and social isolation in this country and in the world? Will you join me in that cause? Thank you. We now know that stories matter. People want to know that you are interested not in what they do, but rather in why they do it. They want to connect to your transformative conscience, not just your words. So let's now be the beacons among the many ripples of hope that are here today to find out both the why and the why not, as well as the what behind this transformative movement. And equally as important to all of you, become great examples and inspire new ripples of hope for others. What you will hear, what you will learn, what you will share and experience in these next 2 days is a call not only to be aware, but more importantly, a call to action, immediate action. For if not now, when? If not you, who? How proud it makes me to see this level of talent. not only understanding the problems that we face, but also supporting this good and urgent effort to fight back. For with us today are experts, welcome. Here too are visionaries and activists, thank you. And here among us are people who do, who act, who are going to dig deep and find new ways to demystify the social determinants of health. I am grateful that you all have joined us. The Dalai Lama is said to have one time noted that in order to understand the pain of others, you must experience what they have gone through. So before we set about today's work, before we take measure of our progress these last 2 years, allow me a few brief stories of the pain that others have experienced involving two unlikely companions, loneliness and fame. Through the course of my own life experience, I have come to respect the emotional power of a personal story. Honestly told, they build trust and they open up a world of opportunity. My first story: there is an attractive young woman on vacation in New York City with her family. She is spotted by a talent scout and recruited to show business. Within a decade, she has won an Academy Award for Best Actress, received 3 Golden Globes, is named one of the magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, and has become the highest grossing action movie heroine of all time. Despite the huge level of success and public admiration, she laminated to Vogue magazine, quote, "No one ever asks me out. I'm lonely every Saturday night." Friends, that person was Jennifer Lawrence. Her loneliness involves one of the most insidious forms, where you have lots of people around you, all the money you can imagine, all of the fame, and yet you feel alone. Another story happens to involve one of the greatest social justice leaders in history. He organized and inspired people. He galvanized a movement that led to the passage of a landmark legislation. But then he took an unpopular stance on a war. He was shunned by former friends and supporters. Invitations to speak stopped coming in. People quit calling. As it had at other times in his life, the despair and isolation plunged him into depression. Problems of this nature had also tormented him in his early years. Following the death of his beloved grandmother, he had even contemplated committing suicide in his childhood. That person was Dr. Martin Luther King. This level of loneliness is so prevalent in today's political society, where we stand up for what we believe, we stand up for an ideal, we stand up for our convictions, yet we face relentless persecution and isolation. Then there's the story of the show business legend and mother of 8. Her struggle with postpartum depression led her to write the memoir called Behind the Smile. As the title suggests, so much of what she experienced in that dark time was hidden from view. Little did she know that years later her son would face a dark night of his own soul. Sadly, the son wouldn't find his way out of it alive. And remembering the last conversation they had before he jumped from an 8th floor window, the famous mother was quoted as saying, quote, when I heard him say to me, "I have no friends." It brought me back to when I went through depression. If I went through that whole experience just to understand my son, that was worth it to me. Ladies and gentlemen, that person was Marie Osmond. She shares a story when she admits to having no sense of self or a life that she could identify as her own. This great star compared a smile that charmed an entire generations as a two-way mirror. She said, "I can see out, but no one can see me." Sadly, isolation and loneliness can affect the young too. In May of this past year, at her 22nd birthday, a young, beautiful, and aspiring young woman, along with the other attendees for her birthday celebration, was asked a question by a famous relative. "What would you like to do next?" The young woman jumped in, wanted to be the first to answer that question. And she said, quote, "I like to learn to love myself." On August 1st, Saoirse Kennedy Hill left this world. Attending her funeral last week made me realize how loneliness and social isolation are not just attacking the vulnerable, like the seniors, or those who served in the military and came home with deep emotional wounds. Rather, it is robbing people of varied backgrounds of their desire to live in the place and peace and happiness that all human beings deserve. Perhaps what Saoirse leaves us with and what we can garner from the next 2 days is to help ourselves learn to love who we are. Accept all of what we are and encourage others to do the same. To be vulnerable, I believe, is the first prescriptive medicine to overcoming loneliness. The American aspiration holds dear the concepts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. But in many instances, we have lost sight of that third virtue. The pursuit of happiness is vanishing from that well-known mantra. You may not think the life experiences revealed in these true stories would have much in common, but each one of them dealt with deep loneliness and isolation. Given the levels of celebrity and public admiration these lonely souls achieved here on earth, you would expect them not to be lonely. That they were should give every one of us pause. It should make us think for a moment, what people in our own life, what people around us are experiencing loneliness and isolation? Who of our family members, our neighbors, our co-workers, our friends, who are bearing these painful stories that remain hidden from the world? We will not know if we do not ask. For me, it is a personal challenge. 27 years ago, my father passed away. In 7 months, my mother died. And I remember the last time I was with my mom was a week before she passed away. We were going to our home, and she was putting the key into the keyhole. And she looked at me and said, "There is a missing link." And I didn't know what she meant. I do now know what she meant. She was lonely and she missed my father. So among our friends in this room, by show of hands, how many of you have experienced loneliness? You're very brave. I asked that question a few months ago at the Milken Institute in front of 500 people, and only a few people raised their hands. And it wasn't until I shared with them that at age 63, I have everything that I could possibly want: a loving partner, a loving family, friends. I sit on 9 boards, and I have experienced loneliness. I've been asking this question in a public gathering for the very reason I shared with you in terms of the Milken Institute seminar. I'm very pleased that today you all have been honest. But people hate to admit to it. Particularly successful, engaged people like those who make up this assembly today, it seems we fear that people will think that there is really something wrong with us. They'll think that if we are lonely, that is kind of an oddity in an era where we claim to be the most connected because we have technology, because we have cell phones. I protest that the very cell phones have created to this very issue that we are experiencing. The truth is, we do live in a connected age. But loneliness rates in the United States have ironically doubled since the 1980s. Today, more than 40% of adults surveyed without having to raise their hands in public report feeling lonely. Research suggests that the real number may be higher. The number of people reporting a close confidant in their lives has been declining over recent decades. The nearest caregiver to someone in need now lives about 275 miles from their loved one. When the United Kingdom appoints a minister of loneliness, it should send a significant signal to all other countries that we have the new chronic condition of the 21st century in front of us. Loneliness zaps vitality, it impairs productivity, and it diminishes enjoyment of life. Its effects on health match those of obesity, alcohol abuse, and smoking. It causes pain, and it diminishes the soul. Yes, I speak with authority. For better or for worse, I assert expert status on this subject. I felt it acutely as a child. You see, when I was 8 years old, I lost most of my ability to hear due to a middle ear infection. For nearly a decade, I endured surgery after surgery. I was bullied and ridiculed by peers, friends, and even family. My hearing loss was so severe that I failed the 5th grade, and I was rejected from every single college that I applied. And to add even more icing on the cake, my high school students voted me the most likely not to succeed. Do you believe there was an actual metric on that? I enjoyed going back 10 years after that graduation. We didn't have mobile Facebook. We couldn't blog at that time. While the last of the 5 surgeries did indeed work to some degree, let me just share with you a little secret. The hearing aids, and I know there are other folks in this audience that share the same plight, the hearing aids do not work to the fullest degree. And even today, my life is surrounded by moments of isolation and moments of loneliness. Hearing loss among the elderly has been designating a leading cause for loneliness and isolation, and yet the health plans will not reimburse for hearing aids at a level that would allow the seniors to purchase them. Yes, those childhood years were lonely. You bet. They were isolated. They were rich with adversity. Thankfully, my sister-in-law, a speech pathologist, helped me learn how to speak again. I overcame enormous odds to eventually attend college and then become a successful business executive, a published author, and a global healthcare activist. I share this with you only because you now know the rest of the story. That the chapter that we live is not the chapter that makes the most meaningful contribution in a person's life. Take the time to listen to the stories of others. I was given the strength within and the love and support without to get through those trials. But I never, ever forgot what it was like to be lonely, what it was like to be denied the right to be heard. When I stand up here today and speak to you about loneliness, I am not speaking from the head. I am speaking from my heart. And believe me when I tell you that each time we fail to take the time to hear each other's stories, we are helping to fertilize and nurture the epidemic of loneliness, particularly in rural America. In our rural communities, home to 1 in 4 older Americans, geographic isolation begets social isolation. In many states, that percentage is much higher. In the state of Maine, where I summer, nearly 60% of adults over the age of 65 live in rural areas. Here in Tennessee, that number is smaller than Maine's, but still clocking in above 35%. We know many social determinants of health impact aging in rural America, and we will tackle them with all the seriousness they deserve over the next 2 days. I strongly believe that any real and lasting improvement, or to use my friend Joe Coughlin's words, movement, will only reach its optimal results when we take the time to hear the stories of those we are trying to help. These are not always easy conversations to have with people, like what happened to my mom. People keep their stories of loneliness buried in shame or denial. And as I have suggested, or as coping mechanisms, sometimes getting them to talk honestly about themselves starts with being a little bit vulnerable yourself. For many years, I never shared my story because I felt as a CEO of a company, you had to be perfect. And how those years of having not shared my story, how I lost the quintessential opportunity to develop the kind of relationships that I now enjoy today. And so my keynote theme here today and advice, open up, be vulnerable, love who you are. Loneliness must come out of the closet. And in this moment, we have a quintessential opportunity to make it okay to say, I am lonely. I have suffered at certain periods of my life from loneliness. Yet I am now in my 6th decade blessed with passions such as this project, gratifying careers, and I credit these blessings to not only a fire in my soul for the good telling, but also the good hearing of human stories. Share your stories, big and small. Hear the stories of those you are working with. It can and will create a more positive future for the many who depend on your ingenuity. Stories can create an aha moment of understanding. A world of opportunity can open up. In my mind, one of the most significant contributing factors to mitigating individual loneliness is that warm moment of relevance when somebody is listening to your own life story. To quote the great poet and human rights activist Maya Angelou, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. The wisdom of her message, our message, is simple. And these pleas to share and to listen are gaining traction in measurable ways. For example, there is an organization called StoryCorps. How many of you heard of it? It's the brainchild of a man named David Isay. Since its founding more than 15 years ago, StoryCorps has collected and archived nearly 75,000 interviews between everyday people. For many years, Dave was a journalist making radio documentaries, but he wanted to shine a light on people not regularly heard from in the media. In a TED Talk, he said, quote, over and over again, I would see how this simple act of being interviewed could mean so much to people, particularly those who had been told that their stories didn't matter. I could literally see people's back straightening as they started to speak into the microphone. In 2003 in New York, StoryCorps built a booth in Grand Central Terminal. Anyone could come to be interviewed, and they could interview someone else, and they could share stories about their lives. Since then, they've built additional booths in Atlanta and in Chicago. They've taken StoryCorps on the road with a mobile booth, and they've launched an app. You may have heard some of the stories that have been shared on NPR. They're archived at the American Folk Life Center at the Library of Congress, preserving our humanity for posterity. After seeing the impact that sharing personal stories could have, StoryCorps started the National Day of Listening, because every life matters equally, every voice matters equally, and every story matters equally. It's observed on the Friday after Thanksgiving, when many families and friends are still gathered together from the holidays. It's a call to listen to one another. I love the idea, but I think we can commit to more than just one day a year. Imagine for a moment the isolation and loneliness that we could diffuse if we took that simple framework and went out into our communities for weekly conversations. Now, there are about 225 of you in this room today. There are 52 weeks in the year. Even if we all just had one such conversation a week, we could hear the stories of more than 10,000 people. And imagine if we could do that twice a week. The benefits could create a social ripple effect extending well beyond those of us gathered here today. Friends, this sharing of stories isn't only a nice way to help people feel better, though it most assuredly is. It's a matter of life and death, particularly for seniors. Suicide rates across the nation are on the rise, but seniors have been hit harder. According to the CDC, in 2017, 47,000 suicides occurred in the United States. People 65 and older accounted for 20% of them. The highest risk group is men who are 65 and older, followed by adults over 85. 3 days ago, an elderly couple in Washington State committed suicide and murder. He killed his wife, and the husband committed suicide because they could not afford medication. How could this be in one of the wealthiest nations on earth that we could sit back and allow that to happen? Many factors drive this disturbing and deadly trend, but one of the most common is loneliness. This is exacerbated by dealing with the loss of a spouse, children moving away, taking their car keys away. It is an accumulative factor. And they call those years the golden years. Many people in this age range are also living in isolation. About 1 in 3 people 65 and older live alone. Half of those over 85 live alone. According to the New York Times, individuals with less social connection have disrupted sleep patterns, altered immune systems, more inflammation, and higher levels of stress hormone. One study found that isolation increases the risk of heart disease by 29% and stroke by 32%. In rural communities, these are even more challenging. Chronic disease is higher in rural America. Disability rates are higher. Healthy behaviors are measured at lower rates. Life expectancy trails the nation. And the flight of young people is only exacerbating the situations. Friends, the numbers are in. And as Senator Patrick Moynihan once said on the Senate floor in debating with a fellow senator, you have a right to your own opinion, but you don't have a right to your own facts. And to echo the words once again of William Wilberforce, the evidence is irrefutable. We do not need more data. We need solutions. Do you agree with me? The problems are clear. The solutions, however, are more complicated. And depending on your ability to increase your collaborative IQ, it will be the most important ingredient to coming up with the solutions. For it is no longer about innovation. We've innovated a lot over the last several decades. It is about integration. Integrating the ideas that each and every one of you are bringing here today. I agree with Dr. Dhruv Kular, who said, quote, increasingly research confirms our deepest intuition. Human connection lies at the heart of human well-being. Friends, I challenge you today to be champions of human connections. At the individual level and in your collective hands, more than in my 2 hands, lies the ability to deliver on the promise of those golden years and the pursuit of happiness for the aging. The isolated, the young are depending on us, and we must do it in the old-fashioned way, one life at a time. The poet Robert Browning, in one telling of his own story, toasted a loving couple by saying, quote, grow old with me, the best is yet to come. It seems quaint in today's social context. But Browning's heart, I believe, was in the right place. His goals were in the right place. His notions were all proper and there. Imagine a world where increasing numbers of aging and isolated human beings can find companionship and relevance and discover that a once elusive sense of well-being is again within life's reach. And so I ask you to raise your glasses right now and toast, and let's toast together to growing unlonely with me. The best of times are embedded in knowing to love yourself and in finding relevance by sharing your stories and listening to the stories of others. Make it a great 2 days. Thank you very much.